you very much, Bernard, and it's really nice to be with you, and I thank you for taking off your time during the lunch hour, because I guess that's what this is, an hour between 1 and 2, when 1 and 2, 12 and 1, I guess. I don't know what time zone I'm in. I've been in so many time zones the last few weeks. But thank you for coming and taking this opportunity to engage in some very meaningful and some very critical thinking. The book itself, Can Man Live Without God, was published a few years ago, and it was born directly out of the 3 lectures that I was privileged to deliver at Harvard University when they presented the subject to me. And so if you do pick up that book, you will get a more exhaustive treatment. The venue was the Harvard Law School, some tremendous interaction with the students and some great question and answer time, almost unedited. If it is edited, it is only to edit it to smoothen out some of the unsaid words or whatever, but they are taken literally right out of the lectures and the interactive time we had. And on the last day, actually, some students were able to join me on the platform, and they themselves interacted with the audience. It's great to be in Singapore for these few days. We've got some busy days ahead of us, but we are honored to be here. And thank you always for being so hospitable and kind as guests come your way. My wife and my daughter are with me, and some of my other colleagues from my office in Atlanta, and actually some even from the Middle East and from India. Many years ago, somebody penned these words rather sarcastically, and I think you will get the point because it is well put. And I quote some of these based on the famous political Scottish activist Andrew Fletcher, who said this: "Let me write the songs of a nation, I don't care who writes its laws. Let me write the songs of a nation, I don't care who writes its laws." What Andrew Fletcher was really hinting at is that sometimes a culture is molded much more by the philosophy of its lyrics and music than it is by any legal system enforced upon them. And invariably, when you're looking for the search of a culture, for the ethos of a culture, for the inclinations and the hungers of a culture, if you really listen to their popular music, you are listening to the popular philosophy of what it is that is shaping the thinking of that culture at any time. And so here's some of these words which I think are very interesting. First, dentistry was painless, then bicycles were chainless, and carriages were horseless, and many laws enforceless. Next, cookery was fireless, telegraphy was wireless, cigars were nicotineless, and coffee caffeineless. Soon oranges were seedless, the putting green was weedless, the college boy was hatless, the proper diet fatless. New motor roads are dustless, the latest steel is rustless, our tennis courts are sodless, our new religion godless. Put very succinctly, in a very poignant way, we've eliminated things from our lives, and as we were coming to the tail end of the 20th century, it became very fashionable to be godless as well, and God became a marginalized entity. This did not happen very suddenly. I remember reading the philosopher Nietzsche many years ago. The German philosopher Nietzsche was actually born in 1844 and died in 1900 at the age of 56. But Nietzsche is the one who made popular the phrase, "God is dead." It is because of him that the 20th century entered with that popularized notion that God is dead. And what Nietzsche really meant was that philosophically God could not survive the onslaught of the skeptic. He could see the age of science coming in, he could see the age of skepticism coming in, and his question was, how can any rational human being still really believe in the supernatural? And Nietzsche had a very powerful way of stating it. He didn't just state it in philosophical fashion back and forth. He also resorted to the writing of dramatic forms of expression. And in this particular parable, which is quite popular, you will hear the metaphors that he uses. They are very profound metaphors. And whether one agrees with Nietzsche or not, one has to agree that he has raised the question with as sharp an edge of a sword as anybody could have raised it. So I'm going to read that parable for a major part of it and then bring my response to you. Listen to how he said it. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, I'm looking for God, I'm looking for God. As many of those who did not believe in God were standing together there, he excited considerable laughter. Have you lost him then, said one. Maybe God has lost his way like a child, said another. Or could be he is hiding. Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage, you think, or emigrated? Thus they shouted and laughed this madman to scorn. But the madman sprang into their midst and pierced them with his glances. Where is God? He cried. I'll tell you, we have killed him, you and I. We are all his murderers. But how did we do this? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us a sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What did we do when we unchained this earth from its sun? Where are we moving now? In what direction? Away from all suns, maybe? Are we not suddenly and perpetually falling? Backwards, forwards, sideways, in all directions? Is there any up or down left? Are we not straying through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not suddenly become colder? Is not more and more night coming on us all the time? Must not lanterns now have to be lit in the morning hours? Do we not hear yet anything of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell anything of God's decomposition? God's decomposed too, you know, and he is dead. He remains dead, and we have killed him. Now, how shall we, the murderer of all murderers, compose ourselves? Because that which was the holiest and mightiest of all that the world ever possessed has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood from us? With what water can we purify ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games will we need to invent? Is not this the greatest of deeds, too great for us to handle? Now, must we not suddenly have to become gods ourselves, simply to seem worthy of what we have done? There has never been a greater deed, you know, and whoever shall be born after us because of this deed shall be part of a higher history than all history hitherto. Here the madman fell silent and again regarded his listeners. They too were silent, and they stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern to the ground, and it broke and went out. I come too early maybe. My time has not yet come. It has been related further that on that same day that the madman entered divers churches and there sang a requiem, Eternam Deo. Let out and quieted, he said to have retorted each time, what are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of a dead God? God is dead. You and I have killed him. When you want to understand what Nietzsche is getting at here, he is trying to remind the listener that this death has come through careful scrutiny, it has come through careful understanding, it has come through the philosophical reasonings and the process, but we must recognize the ramifications of that kind of philosophy. There's no up or down. There's no light anymore. We are falling backwards and forwards. We are straying through an infinite nothing. What Nietzsche is really saying is that existentially points of reference are going to be lost and new points of reference will have to be found. And he says, and we'd better become aware of that. If you remove this transcendent, absolute notion that existed in cultures as a point of reference for our daily definitions of life, its meaning, its destiny, its origin, its value. He said, if that has been wiped out, we had better find new ways of measuring how to answer these questions. That's why he says, who gave us a sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What festivals will we need to invent? Sacred games to imagine that there is something that can be an indicator to us. And to you as young people entering into this 21st century, as young university students, There is no greater question that you are going to face. In fact, I did not design this question myself. It was Will Durant who raised the question a long time ago. He said the greatest question of our time is not going to be North versus South, East versus West, Marxism versus capitalism. He says the greatest question of our time is going to be, can man live without God? That is the question that is raised. If there is no ontic, no objective point of reference from which to measure the existential struggles with which we live in our time, I want to present to you 4 major struggles that emerge from the elimination of the presence of God in a culture's life or in an individual's life. What happens? Can one actually live as if there were no God? If that person wants to live logically, then here are the entailments, and I present 4 of them to you. I have never been able to get meaningful counter perspectives to the answer to the questions that I am raising now. Oh, there are ways of trying to navigate through these issues, but in terms of positing an absolute alternative, there really isn't to these 4 existential struggles. What do I mean by an existential struggle? I mean with that which in your experience you have to wrestle with unavoidably. Somewhere in your experience and in your passions and in your will, you wrestle with these issues. You may not present them as an objective truth, but you do wrestle with them as a necessity in your experience. The first is this, that if God does not exist, there is no objective point of reference for any moral framework. There is no way to arrive at a moral framework on the basis of which to posit any sense of right and wrong. And this is such an important and such a significant factor that I want to quote for you an atheist by the name of Kai Nielsen. Kai Nielsen is probably the most vociferous Canadian atheist of our time, teaches at the University of Calgary in Alberta. I want you to hear what it is he is saying here. Because you see, once upon a time, if you were to read philosophers, going back to the philosophers of the Enlightenment, like Immanuel Kant and so on, they actually believed that you could arrive at a notion of morality without having to posit the existence of God. That was Immanuel Kant's whole philosophical basis of his ethical framework. Now, Kant was a churchman, and he actually said that he believed in a divine power and in a divine design. He said, however, for philosophical reasoning, he didn't see why it was necessary to posit the existence of God. So from the Enlightenment onwards, there were philosophers who were trying to arrive at a moral framework apart from God. Listen now to this 20th century philosopher, Kai Nielsen, who has granted this, at least this possible victory to the theists. He says this, we have not been able to show that reason requires the moral point of view, or that really rational persons, unhoodwinked by myth or ideology, need not be individual egoists or classical amoralists. Now that's a very convoluted way of saying it, but what he's saying is this. Rationally, we've not been able to prove that reason requires a moral point of view. And he says, and we've also not been able to establish why anybody who doesn't believe in God cannot rationally be an amoralist or an egoist. In other words, the field becomes wide open. What he's saying is there is no point of condemnation left. There is no point of justification left for reason. Here's what he says. Reason doesn't decide here. The picture I have painted for you is not a pleasant one. Reflection on this actually depresses me. Pure, practical reason, even with a good knowledge of the facts, will not take you to morality. Pure, practical reason, even with a good knowledge of the facts, will not take you to morality. If you have read the book by Bertrand Russell, which he is in his book, he's included his debate with the philosopher Frederick Copleston. This was the weakest point in Bertrand Russell's argument. Remember the book, Why I'm Not a Christian? Bertrand Russell is debating Frederick Copleston. At one point, Copleston looks at him and says, Lord Russell, do you believe in good and bad? And he said, yes. How do you differentiate between good and bad? Bertrand Russell says, the same way I differentiate between blue and green or yellow and green. Copleston said, wait a minute. You differentiate between yellow and green by seeing, don't you? He said, yes. How do you differentiate between good and bad? Here's this brilliant mathematician philosopher who looks at Copleston and said, I differentiate on those matters on the basis of my feeling. What else? Copleston was a kind man. I think if Bertrand Russell had said that to me, I would have had a very simple response for him. I'd say, Lord Russell, in some cultures they love their neighbors, in other cultures they eat them, both on the basis of feeling. Do you have any personal preference? How in the name of reason can you arrive at a moral law purely on the basis of feeling? Have you seen what this world has done to itself by defining feeling by morality? The true story is told of Joseph Stalin, who, by the way, once upon a time was a seminary student going into the Christian ministry. And then he lost his faith in God for philosophical reasons. When he lost his faith in God, he became a complete atheist. And one day a woman was visiting him because she saw the way he was torturing his own people. He killed 15 million of his own people. And this woman politician from outside the country was having a meal with him, and she said, Mr. Stalin, I have a question for you. How long do you expect to be torturing your own people and expecting them to follow you? And he remained quiet. He called the waiter and said, bring me a chicken, a live chicken. The waiter brought him a live chicken, and Stalin clutched that chicken and started to defeather that chicken as it winced and tried to get out of his clutches. He completely denuded that bird, put that chicken down, took a piece of bread and walked away and bent down. And the chicken came and pecked on his hand to eat of that morsel of bread. And he looked at the woman and said, have you got your answer? I tortured this chicken. It'll follow me for food the rest of its life. People are like that chicken. You torture them and they will follow you for food the rest of their lives. I shared this story with a general from the Center for Geopolitical Strategy in Moscow. And the tears started to run down his face. Once upon a time, an atheist himself, he knew what had happened, and 15 million people were slaughtered in the name of a demagogue's ideas of right and wrong. I remember visiting Auschwitz in Poland. Some of you have probably been there. I know one or two of my colleagues had. I remember walking through the halls, and in pin drop silence, you can't say anything. You cannot say anything. When you see the pictures of little children castrated by Joseph Mengele, little boys standing there staring, almost having like they've lost their minds, as they were points of experimentation for this man. 10 or 12,000 were being exterminated at Auschwitz every day. You walk to the area where the gas ovens were, and you see the words of Adolf Hitler. I want to raise a generation of young people devoid of a conscience, imperious, relentless, and cruel. You saw thousands of suitcases of little children. In one room you saw 14,000 pounds of women's hair who would be scalped after they were sent into gas ovens, and the hair was woven into sacks and sold in the marketplace. Adolf Hitler personally presented Nietzsche's writings to Mussolini and to Stalin. He was looking for the Superman, the man who would become the measure of all things, the man who would become a self-defining point of reference for ethics. One of my colleagues and I were in Israel last week. We have just come straight from Jerusalem to here. And you read and listen. You hear family stories. You watch the slaughter going on. And everyone is angry, and the killing continues. Literally within 12 hours of us leaving, the next killing had taken place of Sheikh Yassin. And you listen to the arguments, and you start asking questions, and you find out, unless there is an objective point of reference for morality, there is no way to condemn anything. Unless there is an objective point of reference for morality, there is no way to condemn anything. If you hear the words, for example, of Steve Turner, who is a very well-known poet, writer, a satirist actually, from the United Kingdom. Steve Turner wrote this in a very sarcastic way about modern man. Here's what he says. We believe in Marx, Freud, and Darwin. We believe everything is okay, as long as you don't hurt anyone, to the best of your knowledge, or to the best of your definition of hurt, and to the best of your knowledge. We believe in sex before, during, and after marriage. We believe in the therapy of sin. We believe that adultery is fun. We believe that taboos are taboo. We believe that everything's getting better despite evidence to the contrary. The evidence must be investigated, and you can prove anything with evidence. We believe there's something in horoscopes, UFOs, and bent spoons. Jesus was a good man, just like Buddha, Muhammad, and ourselves. He was a good moral teacher, although we think some of his good morals were basically bad. We believe that all religions are basically the same. At least the ones that we read were. They all believe in love and goodness. They only differ on matters of creation, sin, heaven, hell, God, and salvation. We believe that after death comes the nothing. Because when you ask the dead what happens, they say nothing. If death is not the end, and if the dead have lied, then it's compulsory heaven for all, excepting perhaps Hitler, Stalin, and Genghis Khan. We believe in Masters and Johnson. What's selected is average, what's average is normal, what's normal is good. We believe in total disarmament. We believe there are direct links between warfare and bloodshed. Americans should beat their guns into tractors, and the Russians would be sure to follow. We believe that man is essentially good. It's only his behavior that lets him down. This is the fault of society. Society is the fault of conditions. Conditions are the fault of society. We believe that each man must find the truth that is right for him, and reality will adapt accordingly. The universe will readjust. History will alter. We believe that there is no absolute truth, except the truth that there is no absolute truth. We believe in the rejection of creeds and the flowering of individual thought. And then he adds his stinger as a postscript. If chance be the father of all flesh, disaster is his rainbow in the sky. And when you hear state of emergency, sniper kills 10, youths go looting, bomb blast school, it is but the sound of man worshipping his maker. Did you hear that? If chance is the father of all flesh, disaster is his rainbow in the sky. And when you hear state of emergency, sniper kills 10, youths go looting, bomb blast school, it is but the sound of man worshipping his maker. When there is no absolute, you open the floodgates of all kinds of relativism that ultimately cannot be justified. I'll give you a bit of a philosophical argument and then illustrate it for you. Those who believe in a relativistic ethic are living with philosophical meaninglessness. Let me tell you why. Anyone who makes the statement, all truth is relative, hear me. Bernard said, put your thinking caps on. You're going to need the thinking caps right now. Here it is. All truth is relative. When you hear that statement, you have to ask the person making the statement whether that statement includes itself or excludes itself. If it includes itself, that means that statement is relative too, which means it isn't always true. If it excludes itself, that means it is positing an absolute while denying that absolutes actually exist. You understand? How do you deny absolutes exist while making an absolute negation? It's like it's like this. Have you ever been at a street light and it's red, and like a good citizen you have stopped and your foot is on the brake and you're daydreaming or singing or something, and all of a sudden you see some cars beside you starting to move, but you're not sure whether you're moving or that car is moving, and you know you're not supposed to be moving. What do? You press harder on the brake, don't you, to make sure you're not moving. But if you still looked at those and you were not sure, that brake pedal gets harder and harder. You want to make sure that you're not moving. What do you do as a final resort? You look at a tree or a building that is not moving and make sure that you're measuring your movement by that stationary object. What do you think would happen if the trees and the buildings started moving too? How would you now know whether you are moving or not? Out of flux, nothing but flux. Out of change, nothing but change. You're always uncertain. Remember the story of the man who used to go to work at a factory in Leicester, England. And he would stop outside a clockmaker's store every morning as he would go to the factory, and he would adjust his watch with his clock. And one day the clockmaker stopped and said, "Excuse me, sir, I find this very amusing. Every morning you stop and synchronize your watch with my clock. Why do you do that?" He said, "I'm embarrassed to tell you my watch doesn't work very well, and I'm the timekeeper in the factory. I have to ring the bell at 4 o'clock every afternoon and at the end of the day's work. So when I go into work, I want to make sure that my watch is synchronized with your clock outside." And the clockmaker says, "I got some shocking news for you. My clock doesn't work very well either. And I synchronize it with the bell that I hear from the factory at 4 o'clock. What do you do when two wrong clocks compare themselves to each other? They get wronger and wronger all the time. That's what's happened in society with ethics today. We are correcting wrong behavior by other wrong behavior, and we have no idea of what is right behavior anymore. The sense of ought is not there. We have wiped away the horizon. There is no up or down. Lanterns are having to be lit in the morning hours now. With what power did we do this? Who is going to take the new power to define what is morally right and what is morally wrong? Which man is the measure of all things? Hitler or Mother Teresa? There is no moral law. Secondly and quickly, if God is dead, there is no moral framework. There is then no point of reference for meaning. You cannot actually define what meaning means. Everybody finds their own meaning. Everybody finds their own meaning. And you see this happening again and again and again and again. I was in one country where the horrific realities are stated of what is happening to young children, what is happening to young women in the world of prostitution. In some of these countries, 18-month, 24-month, 36-month-old children are being rescued from the hands of men who are physically drawing their pleasure, literally from tiny little babies in their arms. Each one is finding meaning for himself or herself. And the naturalist actually tells you this, that you have to determine what is meaningful for you. With what basis can the naturalist do that without at the same time ascertaining for himself or herself the absolute position of moral authority? That this is what meaning is. I recall years ago speaking at the University of Manila in the Philippines and giving a whole talk on man's search for meaning. And a student stood up at the back and he just shouted at me and he said, everything in life is meaningless. Everything is meaningless. I said, "You don't believe that?" He said, "I do." I said, "No, you don't." He said, "Yes, I do." I said, "No, sir, you don't." He said, "Who are you to tell me I don't?" I said, "Say it again." He said, "Everything in life is meaningless." I said, "You don't believe that?" He said, "Yes, I do." And he was really angry by this point. I said, "Stay standing. This won't take more than a minute." I said, "Here's my question to you. I assume that you assumed that what you just said was meaningful. Is that right?" He said, "Huh?" I said, "You heard me. I assume that you assumed that what you just said was meaningful. And if what you just said was meaningful, then everything is not meaningless. On the other hand, if everything is meaningless, what you just said was meaningless too. You've really said nothing, you can sit down." You know, after the talk, I'm not kidding you, after the talk, I walked to the back, I was heading out, and he was walking at the back, talking to himself, "Everything is meaningless." That night, he came to a public meeting, and he turned his life over to Christ. He knew you cannot live logically without meaning. And if you think there is no meaning, how do you meaningfully say that? The moment you open your mouth, you assume some sort of meaning. That's why the Eastern mystic said it once, when the mouth opens, all are fools. Aha, but his mouth opened to tell us that. Follow what I'm saying? The denial of meaning and the struggle of meaning is a very, very serious issue. But let me tell you why it's serious, and I'm going to challenge your thinking here. I know one of the most difficult problems in philosophy to answer is the problem of suffering. How can a God of all power and all love allow for evil in this world? I know you've asked it, I've asked it. I've written a book on the subject. But what I want to tell you is this. Can I tell you something more staggering than that? G.K. Chesterton said, meaninglessness does not come from being weary of pain. Meaninglessness comes from being weary of pleasure. The loneliest people in the world are not those who are in pain. The loneliest people in the world are those whose pleasures have died, and it has left them empty-handed. The Algerian existentialist Albert Camus tells the story of a man and a woman. He was a businessman who had gone into town one day in the city to deal with some of his diamonds. And she had never come into the city. For the first time he brought her. He said, why don't you look around and I will just sell my wares. And then we'll meet at the end of the day, we'll have dinner, check into a hotel and spend the night there. And she was now alone for the first time. Here in the city, her eyes are getting wide with all the options, and she starts thinking of some teenage dreams she'd had. She never had a chance to fulfill. She thought this was maybe the moment, but she was ambivalent, afraid that if she did indulge in some way, and her husband found out, it would be catastrophic for them in their relationship. Struggling whether she should give in or not give in, the hours go by, they meet up, they go into the hotel, have dinner, get into the bed, and he is sound asleep in a short while. She's lying in bed thinking to herself, I may never have this chance again. While he's sound asleep, she slips out from under the covers, gets changed, goes out, according to the writer, enjoys the lust of the night. Comes back at the end of it, gets changed, and gets under the covers again. She puts her head on the pillow. Now she can't sleep. The tears are beginning to run down the side of her face. And then those tears break into uncontrollable sobs. And she's sitting down and sobbing her heart out. And he gets up and says, what's the matter? What's the matter? And the existentialist writer, in typical anti-climax in existential theory, just shrugs him aside and says, nothing, just nothing. You see, the loneliest moment is when you've experienced that which you thought would deliver the ultimate, and it has let you down. Boris Becker, after winning Wimbledon for the second time, I think, made the comment that his greatest struggle in life was with suicide. Mel Gibson, who has produced the film The Passion, which I hope many of you will see, Mel Gibson said the biggest struggle in his life prior to his coming to know Christ in that relationship was his struggle with suicide. Jack Higgins, who wrote the book The Eagle Has Landed, was asked the question, what is it you now know as an older man that you wished you'd known as a younger man? Higgins said, I wished I'd known then what I know now, that when you get to the top, there's nothing there. When you get to the top, there's nothing there. Some of the loneliest people in the world are those who've enjoyed pleasure and find out it really doesn't deliver. In fact, it ultimately empties your own person out while denuding the other person in the process as well. No law, no meaning. Thirdly, there is no hope. I'll just keep this brief and give you some time for questions here. No hope. And it is this. Outside of God, you're left with 80 years and 10, and nothing is left beyond the grave. Why are there cultures all over the world who long and yearn for life beyond the grave? Is that not some existential yearning that we have within us? Would it be not like something like a fish that is you're longing to live on dry land, as it were? We live in time, locked into time. We live with injustice, locked into injustice. We live with severed relationships. We live with dying dreams. We live with broken aspirations. And every time you go to a funeral, the question that haunts always is this the end? Is this the end? Billy Graham was telling us once at a lunch that he was invited to the conference hall of the famed Konrad Adenauer, the Chancellor of Germany, picking up the broken piece of the country after the war. And Graham, as a young man, was invited in, and Adenauer, that brilliant man, looked at Billy Graham at one stage and said, "Mr. Graham, I have a question for you. Do you really believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead?" Billy Graham was shocked by the question, and he paused and he said, "Chancellor, if I didn't believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, I would have not have any gospel left to preach." Billy Graham says, Konrad Adenauer got up, walked over towards the window, looked outside at the ruins of his city, and then he said this, "Mr. Graham, outside of the resurrection of Jesus, I know of no other hope for mankind." I think it's a unique moment in history. It's a unique event in history. An event that was so sustained both in prophecy and in history and in existential experience. But outside of God, there is no hope. No law, no meaning, no hope, and finally, there is no recovery. You see, this is the point. If a theist who follows God and that God is the true God to be followed, even if there are sacrifices in this world, you find that what you believed was to be the truth, because truth is ultimately the most valuable thing in life. But if the atheist has risked everything he believed or everything she believed, that there is no God, and ends up finding that there is a God, that person has lost everything. And that is precisely the point of Blaise Pascal. Blaise Pascal was not making an inescapably logical argument. He was making an existentially undeniable argument. And here's what he said. Should a man be in error in supposing the Christian religion to be true, he could not be a loser by mistake. Why? Because existentially, he or she finds the fulfillment that the existentialist tells us the individual must try to find. If you find that fulfillment in the following of that person of God, he says, I can't be a loser if I turn out to be wrong, because the worst case scenario is I become nothing, and nothing is not going to think of what happened when it was something. He says, so the existential test is met for you. But now he gets to the existential challenge, to the counterpoint. But how irreparable is his loss, and how inexpressible his danger, who should err in supposing it to be false. But how irreparable is his loss, and how inexpressible his danger, who should err in supposing it to be false. So what I say to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that the loss that is encountered when a person ultimately turns away from God and finds out that that belief was false and flawed, that person has lost everything. It's a very simple thing I want to leave you with, and that is this. When you follow the truth, and that truth is revealed in the person of God, and I'm a Christian, I follow the person of Jesus Christ, and you find him to be the way, the truth, and the life. You find the point of reference for moral law. You find the point of reference for meaning. You find the point of reference for hope. And you find the point of reference for full recovery. For you see, I was 17 years old on a bed of suicide in Delhi with a lot of academic pressure, going to the university there. A lot of academic pressure. I don't know how it is here, but if this was typically Asia, you live with that constant pressure all the time. It's not good enough to pass. You have to come in the top few. We were not going to make it in India if we didn't make it in the top few. I was not going to make it. I tried to poison my life. Ended up in a hospital room, and there, all alone, somebody brought me a Bible. I'd never opened it and read it. Never. And as that Bible was being read to me, Jesus looks at Thomas and says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father except through me. I said, if you are who you claim to be, take me out of this room, and I will give you my life and not leave one stone unturned. That was when I was 17. It was the greatest day in my life. It changed not only what I did, it changed what I wanted to do. And for you as young men and women with your bright minds and bright ambitions, I present to you that Christ, because I believe outside of him, you don't have that law, you don't have that meaning, you don't have that hope, you don't have that recovery. If I may take 2 minutes, I give you this illustration and then leave it for Q&A here. When I happened to speak at the United Nations to the ambassadors, it was a tough setting because you can't say too much without offending somebody. So I talked on how to build a nation, what are the points of nation building, and I talked about eternity, morality, accountability, charity, and they were all enjoying it. But now they want me to find out, where is it going to go? How do you anchor it all? Those are very motherhood statements. Everybody, so yeah, that's wonderful, but where do you go? So I told them this parable. It's a parable of a rich man who had a son. And that son used to go into the city every day and walk around, and he'd see a beggar there whom he befriended and chatted with that beggar. And the beggar really grew to like this young lad. Rich man, I had nothing, and he would pick up a conversation. And he'd tell the beggar about a big home that his father had, a beautiful art gallery, he was an art aficionado, and so on and so forth. The beggar's imagination peaked, but never seen anything like it. Some time went by, the young man stopped coming. He wondered what happened and found out the young man had suddenly died. So he went over to the gatekeeper and he said, "Is that true?" He said, "Yes, the young man is dead." So the beggar went, got some paper, got some crayons, and he drew a portrait of the way he remembered the young man. And he said, "I understand the rich man there has an art gallery. I want him to take this portrait of his son as I've drawn it." It wasn't a very good portrait. But the watchman was quite impressed and said the father might be wanting to see it, so he gave it. Nothing came of it. Some years go by and the beggar hears the rich man had passed away and that the art gallery is going to be auctioned. So he wondered if his picture was going to be there. So he put on some good clothes, walked over, got the watchman's permission, went into the room, all these pictures painting. Lo and behold, there's that crayon drawing of his own. Big art fans are there, and the auctioneer starts by pounding the gavel saying, "We are ready." He said, "But there was a caveat in the will, and it said this, that the first thing to be auctioned is that crayon portrait of his son." And everybody moaned and groaned. Nobody wanted it. Nobody bid on it. So the beggar put his hand into his pocket and picked out those coins, what he had. He said, "I bid so much." No competition. And the auctioneer said, "Sold." So he goes and picks it up and he's walking away, and somebody said, "Let's get on with the real stuff." And the auctioneer said, "No, there was a second caveat. It said this, whoever bids on the painting of that picture of his son gets the whole art gallery." When I shared that with the UN ambassadors, I said to them, "I just want you men and women to know, when you get the son, you get all that the father has for you." And one Egyptian ambassador came to me and he shook my hands and he said, "Dr. Ravi," he said, "when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask Lord Jesus if you and I can be roommates." I said, "Mr. Ambassador, when you get to heaven and see the Lord Jesus, you will not want another roommate." Besides, I didn't want to tell him what my wife would say. When you get the son that God has given for you, you get what he has in his riches and in his reserves and in his treasures. No law, no hope, no meaning, no recovery. That's the atheist. With God, you have all four. Thank you very much for listening.
Now, this is the time for those of you who have questions to ask. You see that there are 4 microphones here.
You're going to ask?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Hi. What do you think would happen if there's only one religion in the world? Would there be less conflicts?
What do you think would happen if there's only one religion in the world? Would there be less conflicts? I don't think there will always only be one religion in our human scene as we understand it today. Because anytime you find someone who wants a way to affirm something, there will be somebody else who will want to affirm its opposite. But I do believe that there is only one way that's the truth. And that is an important point. That truth, by definition, is exclusive. If truth, by definition, is exclusive, that means it excludes all of the other systems too. And people generally have this mythological belief that Christianity is the only religion of exclusivity. That is absolutely not true. Hinduism is exclusive, Buddhism is exclusive, even Baha'ism, although it says it includes everything, excludes the exclusivists. Every major religion at some point is exclusionary. Gautama Buddha, in fact, was born a Hindu, and then he rejected some of its fundamental tenets in order to formulate his own doctrine of nirvana and his own different version of reincarnation and so on. So if I can get the point of your question, here it is. If there is ever one belief system in the world where everybody believes the same thing is true, if we live by those precepts of that truth which is actually true, we will learn to live peaceably with each other. But the moment we try to transcend those and live in the abuse of those truths, we will not have the peace that we are looking for. Thomas Merton, in his book, The Seeds of Contemplation, said this: man is not at peace with his fellow man because he's not at peace with himself, and he's not at peace with himself because he's not at peace with God. So you start off with God, get the peace within, and then you have your fellow relationship. I think once we know the truth sets us free. And if we abide in that truth, we live peaceably. If we violate that truth, we live with sword against each other. Here is a very important thing, I think, to try and bear in mind in the midst of all of this. People often get upset saying, why did God give us only one way? May I suggest to you, if God had given us 1,000 ways, we would have wanted 1,001. Because the essence of pride is to have things our own way. And God revealed himself in his Son. And he said to Adam, if you live by this, you will live in the garden. You will live in peace. You will live in fellowship. If you violate it, death comes. So there is only one truth. If we live by it, we live peaceably. If we abuse it or try to transcend it or violate it, we live at animosity to each other. Having said all of that, my plea in the world is this. Even though there are those who have different beliefs, it is imperative that we learn to live peaceably with one another and never resort to violence, because that is never the answer to trying to find the questions of truth answer. If God is who he claims to be, he will ultimately set the balances straight, and truth will be upheld, and error will be shown for what it is. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Joseph. I'm a year 2 student. Personally, I'm an agnostic. I think you gave a great speech, but I have one objection to your speech, and then I have one question. My objection is this. You raised the examples of Hitler and Stalin as atheists who caused great evil. My objection is that atheism is not the only creed that leads to evil. I think religion has also led to much evil and suffering. Christianity inspired the Inquisition and the Crusades, and other religions led to, say, the Taliban. So I think good and evil are spread equally across
Your point is well taken, but it's misunderstood. You're misunderstanding what was said. I didn't say all atheists are evil and that all religious people are not. I am just saying that there is no logical basis for atheism to find a point of morality. That's what I'm saying, and that you cannot deny.
That I do accept.
Accept. Okay, so let me complete the thought then. Once you accept that, here's the point. Which means, if a religious person brings evil, say if a Christian does, that Christian is bringing about evil in violation of the point of reference for good and evil. The atheist, when he brings evil or she brings evil, is a logical outworking of what they actually believe, and that's a huge difference. Now proceed with your question.
My question is based on that assertion, which is that God somehow makes morality, creates an objective framework of morality. I disagree with that. I think that inserting God into the equation does not add any strength to the moral framework. Let me explain. Because the objectivity of a God-based moral framework is based on God says so, therefore you obey. Am I correct? But
no. You have positioned it wrongly. But continue. I don't want to interrupt. If you were not yet finished, go ahead.
Okay, based on that, right? So basically, we are the religious person follows the moral commands of his or her God. So, but why does his or her God make these particular moral commands? Is it because these moral commands are somehow the best moral systems that any person can adopt? If that's the case, then we can remove the God from the equation, and the moral values will still be as strong as they were. You don't need a God to support that moral framework, because the God chose those moral values because they were the best. Alternatively, you could argue that the God chose those moral values because he just chose to. There's no reason for that. In which case, you're subjecting the moral framework to the whims and fancies of a God with no reason behind them. So either way, that the God does not add any strength to the moral framework. But as you argue,
I understand the problem now. I think you've obviously taken classical arguments for people like Russell and others who use it this way. Either God is by fiat will uttering certain do's and don'ts, which means the law is sort of somehow inferior to him, or the moral law is above him, to which either he is subject. What is the rational basis? So now that you've framed your question, let me give you your answer. Evil is to life what contradiction is to reason. If an argument is contradictory, the argument breaks down. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, if the argument is contradictory, the argument breaks down. If evil enters life, evil breaks down. Life breaks down. And the reason is this. It is not so much that God says to you, this is what you should do, and therefore you should go and do it. It is the fact that in the very existence and the essence and the person of God, there is no contradiction. God can never cease to exist by definition. God can never not be. His very being is coherent and indestructible. And that characteristic that makes it impossible for God to not exist, out of that is emergent the moral framework by which you and I must live. So you cannot take the result without having the cause. You cannot say, oh, I suppose I should not lie, therefore I can not lie and not have God for it. That's not the reason He's giving it to us. It is the fact that if the designer of your life and mine is God Himself, who cannot lie, who cannot cease to exist, who is a necessary being, He gives to us 3 emergent mandates. And if you follow me now, I give you those 3 emergent mandates. And it is this, that when you are, boy, that light sure shines in my eyes here. If you take any quantity in this world, any physical quantity, and slice it down and reduce it down, you will somehow find that the reason for its existence is not in itself. That the reason for its existence is still outside of itself. So you've got something greater than the physical as that which has to explain reality. The physical in itself doesn't have it. Then there is a second thing. The second thing is this, that when you see aesthetic design, you may assume that there is an aesthetic designer behind it, but you don't have to assume it. You can see anything aesthetic as accidental, that it actually could have just come into being over aeons of time. But when you see intelligent design, you see intelligence behind it. So the first thing is you see a spiritual transcending reality. The second thing you see is an intelligent transcending reality. Then the third thing is you see that life is not just a community thing, it is a personal thing, and it is a moral thing. You think personally and you think morally. The very argument you're giving to me is based on the fact that there must be some moral rationale for why all this must be either true or false or one way or the other. So you've got a spiritual, you have got an intelligent, and you've got moral progenitors for the way you and I exist. That spiritual, moral, and intelligent pure progenitor is God Himself. So you cannot say, I will take the result of that without the cause of that, because the result of it doesn't exist in and of itself. It emerges from the coherent, indestructible very being of God. That's the first thing. And once you take God out of it, you have lost your rational basis to tell anybody why he shouldn't do otherwise. So God becomes a necessary being. If you espouse the morality without Him, what is your basis for it? You have no basis. I'll give you one come back and then we'll take the next one. Do you want to come back on that?
That will take me some time.
It will take a lot of time, yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Jamie. Before I start, I just say that I'm not a Christian. But what I want to say is not a personal attack on religion itself. But I feel that today I have to bring up some points of contention which I have against your message.
Okay, please.
Okay, I agree with you totally of what you said just now, that what lies at the root of this debate is whether you believe in God or not.
No,
is that what you're trying to say?
Alright, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so you are saying that people who do not believe in God do not even have a logical framework to argue it because they are basing it on human emotions.
Morality.
Morality,
Yes.
right? And so you point the example of Hitler and Stalin and so on and so forth. What I do not like about these examples, although they illustrate the dangers of not having moral values based on religion, is the fact that there is an underlying assumption that people who do not have religion cannot act for the good of mankind. There are so many other historical figures in history who have contributed to humanity, and they themselves were not staunch Christians or Buddhists or whatsoever.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. That's not the argument.
Okay. I mean, that is an underlying assumption.
No, it is not. It is not. The underlying assumption, again I say, is not that a person who doesn't believe in God is a bad person. I never said that. I said there is no rational basis, and even I didn't say that. Atheists have said that.
Okay, so you're saying that rationality can only exist in morality if you believe...
Morality is unjustifiable even in rationality.
Yeah, I mean it's only justifiable through God and not emotions. But to have emotions is to be human, you see. And to make mistakes is to be human. So what you're trying to say is that for the price of world peace, we have to give up this freedom of feelings and emotions, which will lead to mistakes, but will as well lead to the advancement of mankind. So by subjugating our emotions to the rules set out by one objective God, which in a way I've disagreements over whether it's objective in the first place and to which God are you referring to. As you said, there are many religions in the world, and the ideal case is that everyone believes in one God.
Right.
But as I said, to have emotions is to be human, so it's impossible for us humans to ever believe in one God. And you were saying that, I agree with you that it is important to have meaning in life, and you said that we can only find meaning if we believe in God. But I think that's a very sweeping statement, and there's so many other ways besides material needs and God to find meaning in life.
Hey, Jamie, I think your questions are very valid. I appreciate what you're saying. Again, let me respond to both of them because I think you're bypassing some very critical reason in the process of saying what you're saying. G.K. Chesterton said the tragedy of disbelieving in God is not that a person ends up believing in nothing. He says, alas, it is much worse. A person may end up believing in anything. That's what I'm saying to you. You may choose to be a very decent moral human being, and there have been wonderful decent moral human beings in existence. They're not all Stalins, they're not all Hitlers. You've got many decent, notable, virtuous living people. The point I'm making, and I want you to hear me very clearly, is that atheism has granted that there is no rational basis on which to condemn one over against the other. It is purely pragmatic. So you lose your right, first of all, to make a difference. You are making a difference, but you don't have the metaphysical framework with which to make the difference. It's purely your decision over somebody else's one. Why is yours better than theirs? The second thing you say is that the emotional aspect of freedom is very important. Absolutely. That's why God doesn't violate it. God has given you the freedom to either choose or to reject, but you cannot make a choice without taking its entailments as well. That's all God has said.
That's what I'm against. You give up the freedom of choosing your metaphysical, your innermost beliefs, because what you're saying is that you have to believe in God in the first place, and that in itself is a sacrifice of your freedom.
You don't have to believe in God in the first place at all. You have to believe that there is such a thing as truth. Okay? And I'm saying to you that the truth factor is surrendered morally, meaningfully, in hope, and in recovery by the naturalistic framework. Even Bertrand Russell said this. He said, I cannot live by the logical outworkings of what I'm saying, so in some cases I will have to act as if God actually exists. So which means he's living with systemic contradiction. And your point is very well taken. The emotional privilege of freedom is a very big one, Jamie. But I think you're misunderstanding the alternative. I do not feel any sense of compulsion in my emotions just to follow God. In fact, I am now freer than I have ever been before. It is what Jesus said, if you abide in my word, you are then my disciples. Then you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. I am saying to you that in denying God, you're actually in bondage to your own emotions. You do not ultimately know the purpose of life. And
why is there a precondition to the acceptance of God? That's what I'm against.
Is there a precondition?
It's like, as you say, as long as you open my heart to me, then the rest will follow. So there is always this, it cannot be that you find out more about me, then you choose whether to open.
But are you angry with the law of gravity? If you jump, what do you think is going to happen?
But I can always escape gravity by going down space.
Exactly. Well, yeah, you have to find counter means, but you're taking the law of gravity into consideration, aren't you?
Yes, that's true.
Absolutely.
But you're assuming that God is a law, and that's what I'm against.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is that God exists as an entity.
And that's a personal opinion.
No.
I mean, I can believe that there's no God, right?
Would you like to give me an argument of why I believe God exists? And
a
then we
logical
close.
argument not based on personal opinion.
No, not on personal experience. Not on personal experience. And if you read the book, Can Man Live Without God? You see, if you and I were only arguing on personal experience, we wasted our time. Personal opinion, even worse. Personal opinion is even worse than personal experience. At least in experience, somebody can say, I've had such and such opinion, is what I believe. So it's not personal opinion. There are 4 questions, Jamie, that you answer in life, that I answer in life. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. You have to answer it. Why am I here? What's right and wrong? What brings me meaning? What happens to a human being when I die? And I'm going to challenge you now to listen, because I believe I'll prove that you constantly live with contradiction. There are 3 tests for truth. 3 tests for truth. The first test is this. An argument must be logically consistent. Okay? Secondly, it must be empirically adequate. Agreed? Okay. Number 3, it must be existentially relevant. Logical consistency, empirical adequacy, existential relevance. When you take these 3 tests and put it to atheism, it is logically inconsistent. It is empirically inadequate because it argues from the negative. And it is existentially, ultimately, each one determines their own relevance, which means it takes away from you any condemnation of anyone else's belief, whether it's their opinion or their experience. So atheism falls on its face in all 3. When you take the Christian faith, you look for logical consistency in origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. 2 tests for truth you will always apply. One is correspondence theory. Does the statement a person make correspond to reality? Number 2 is the coherence theory. When all of these answers are given, is there a coherence to all of these answers? When you take the look at the person of Jesus Christ, who was prophesied on his birth centuries before he came into this world. So you already see a supernatural element coming in. It is not mere naturalism. But you start taking a look at this prophetic material. Take a look at his arrival in history, his life in history, his death in history, and his resurrection in history. The empirical evidence was so strong, Jamie, that if you listen to this simple statement, Christianity could have been destroyed in 1 solitary minute. 1 solitary minute, Christianity could have been destroyed if somebody had just presented the body of Jesus after he claimed to have risen from the dead. He didn't say he was going to spiritually rise again. He said he was going to bodily rise again. And he had enough enemies who could have simply said, here is that body. He never really rose again. But the physical evidence for the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus is so overwhelming. And the prophetic element in the Old and the fulfillment in the New Testament. Over 1,500 years the Bible was written. It is not like one writer taking a dictation theory and saying this is a perfect book. 1,500 years the Bible is revealed. And after all these years of 2,000 years of textual scrutiny, even some of the staunchest skeptics will tell you there is no document in early history, none, that has the corroboration documentarily, historically, archaeologically, and evidentially that this particular book has. There is so much in there that if you really wanted to destroy it, there's enough empirical statements for you to try and disprove it. It is not some pie-in-the-sky opinion, existential type thing. There are objective moral facts presented there, so it's not my subjective belief. It is based on the reason of the person of Jesus Christ. And so what I challenge you to do is take the Gospels, read it with an open heart, and you say, God, if you really are real, you show yourself to me, and read it with the mind of a scrutinizing individual. God's given you great intelligence. You ask the right questions. Look at it with scrutiny. And I say to you, you'll find out that everything he ever said would come to be true, turned out to be true. And the most important thing he said, Jamie, is that your problem and my problem is really not that we need more evidence. Your problem and my problem is that no matter how much evidence there is, we still want to have it our own way. And that is the problem in the world today. Everybody wants to have it their own way. I give you two things, and that is this. And then I'll give you an illustration, then be through. While we were dealing with people of various factions, we were actually in the home of a leading radical man in Hebron. I won't name his position or whatever. And I said this to him: you follow a different religion, sir, and I follow a different faith. I said, but this man was a terrorist. He was in prison for 18 years. 7 of his 10 children are dead. My traveling associate and I were together. And I said, before I leave, I want to say this to you. We agree on one thing. When you kill somebody, they want to take revenge and kill somebody you love. When you hurt somebody, they want to hurt you. When you wrong somebody, they want to wrong you. He said, that is correct. I said, I want to point you to a place where when sin was thrown, it didn't bounce back. And that is the cross. On the cross, all of the evil in the world was thrown onto Jesus. And his answer was not that it bounced back. His answer was, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. And then I said to him, we disagree on another thing. You think Abraham offered, as at least in the group we were discussing, and I said it. Abraham offered Ishmael. You say. The Old and the New Testaments, we believe, said he offered Isaac. And at the last minute, as he was about to bring the knife down, God said, stop, I myself will provide. I said, sir, I said in the discussion group, 2,000 years ago, God himself did provide in his Son. And as long as we reject his Son, we will be sacrificing our own sons and daughters at some altar of hatred or some altar of violence. So the answer is either to trust the Son he has provided for you, or we look to a very bleak future. I was told by a leading Israeli Mossad man, the question is not when a nuclear device, if a nuclear device is going to be detonated, the question is when. And you as young people are looking to a world of fearsome possibilities. I just say to you, by all means study all these religions, because they all may make many great claims. I'm telling you why I believe in Jesus Christ, because the answers to the 4 questions were truthfully given by him, and the only system I know where it is completely coherent. Here is the closing illustration, and I'll be through. It comes out of a song some years ago called Desert Pete. A man wandering through a desert with bottles of water on his shoulders, and he began to get thirsty. And that thirst was getting deeper and deeper, and he was conserving it till all the water was gone. He saw a pump in the desert. He ran towards the pump. He lifted the handle, put it down, dry sound, metal upon metal. There was no water. He started to panic. But then he looked at a tin can around it. Inside the tin can was a message. Dear traveler, do not despair. There is enough water here. Just follow the instructions. Lift the handle of the pump. Bring it down. When you hear the sound of metal on metal, it'll discourage you. But here's what you do. Under the pump, just in front of it, buried under the sand, is a bottle of water. Do not despair. Pick up that bottle of water, pour it into the cylinder, and start priming the pump. The moisture will get the system to work. Water will come gushing out of the pump. You can drink all the water you want. Refill all your bottles. Don't forget to fill up that one bottle and put it back for the next passerby. Warning. You're going to be tempted when you see this one bottle of water to drink it, but you'll be so thirsty again, and so will everybody else who goes by. Empty it out as instructed, and you'll have all the water you want, and so will everybody else going by. That's what you're up against. When you come up against Christ, he offers you that drink, that living water, to free you to be what he designed you to be, not to be enslaved just by the moment. If you empty your life on yourself, you will soon be thirsty again, and so will everybody else who comes across your path. You empty it out into his hands. He will fill you and give you the water that you can share with everybody else too, so life can be full and meaningful. It's in his hands that the 4 questions are answered that meet the test of truth, and it is in his person that you find it. And may we live peaceably with our differences, but it's not a subjective belief, it's based on objective measurement, and I invite you to do the same. In Hindi they say, "Bahut mehrbani." Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Some will say